Advocacy Day. A little housekeeping before we begin. If you have any questions or concerns with the technology, type in the chat or email us at training@odvn.org. In order to see the interpreter, make sure you're in gallery view by clicking on the top right of your screen. You also have the ability to pin a specific video if you only want to see the interpreter's video. It's so good to see everyone here. Lots of familiar faces and lots of new ones too. In fact, we doubled the number of people who signed up to attend today's program, 300. Our grassroots effort to take action is gaining a lot of momentum since we did this the first time just 5 months ago. Thank you to the nearly 100 staffers from ODVN and our programs who are participating as advocates today. We have 55 meetings scheduled with legislators. It's been an extraordinary effort encompassing all of Ohio, and we couldn't be more grateful for everyone's efforts. Thank you to the legislators who are on our program today. Representatives Laura Lanise, Erica Crowley, Cindy Abrams, and Janine Boyd. Senators Nikki Antonio and Stephanie Kunzie. Thank you for being here and for your work supporting domestic violence survivors. Also, thank you to the ODVN board members who are meeting with legislators today. Kim Stanley, Deidre Lashley, Donya Buchanan, Kelly Cook, Shelley Klinger, Gina Patterson, Joanna Hall, and our former board president, Kathy Azawa. Our voices across the state are uniting and they are getting stronger. We're delivering the message, get the dollars to the programs so that they can continue their work and make the policy changes that keep victims safe and improve their lives. This Advocacy Day, we're focusing on 4 main issues. Increase the line item in the state budget from $1 million a year to $5 million. ODVN's legislative priorities include House Bill 3, which would require law enforcement officers to use assessments to measure lethality when they respond to domestic violence calls. Senate Bill 90, which makes strangulation a felony domestic violence offense in the criminal code, and House Bill 93, which makes important fixes to Ohio's address confidentiality law. In addition to hearing from our legislative champions, this morning you'll hear from the directors of 3 of our member programs. They'll give you a taste of what it's been like on the front lines. You'll also hear from Dionna Clark, a survivor whose experience with domestic violence turned her into an activist and an author. But first, ODVN's Executive Director, Mary O'Doherty, will talk about why Ohio should increase state funding for domestic violence services.
Thank you, Bridget. Good morning, everyone. It is wonderful to know that so many of our members, stakeholders, and supporters are with us today as we launch our advocacy work for this legislative session. I'll get right down to it. The Ohio Domestic Violence Network respectfully requests an increase in state funding from $1 million to $5 million per year. Many of you know that Ohio has a 2-year budget, so that means we are asking that the next state budget include $10 million to support our program's work with Ohio's most vulnerable families. So I've been making the rounds, visiting with legislators and key stakeholders, and I'll tell you that I've heard a lot of support for our funding request and a lot of support for our work. But I've also been told our request is audacious and that the idea of going from a $1 million line item to $5 million is, at best, ambitious, especially when our state is recovering from a pandemic. Yes, it's been a tough year for many of us, but it's been a really tough year for the families seeking help at our programs. History has shown that domestic violence increases in the aftermath of disaster, and I'm here to tell you the pandemic and the economic downturn are contributing to an increase in violence for families in Ohio. We know this because we surveyed our member programs in January. We had a fabulous response rate. 94% of our programs answered our survey. And more than half of our service providers reported that last year, they saw an increase in survivors seeking shelter, an increase in calls to the hotline, and an increase in other requests for services compared to 2019. Meanwhile, 58% of our programs reported something we had heard anecdotally since April. Programs reported an increase in the severity and lethality of the abuse. Shelter staffers reported that they were seeing more serious injuries and a notable increase in reports of strangulation. Some programs told us the number of calls to their hotlines nearly tripled in the last year, and that the average crisis call took more than twice as long to finish. Meanwhile, domestic violence fatalities in Ohio were up by 35%, according to ODVN's latest fatality count. ODVN has 75 member programs. In 2019, they served more than 82,000 survivors, including nearly 12,500 children. They answered close to 98,000 crisis calls and sheltered more than 9,000 victims. Those are some pretty big numbers, but let's consider those numbers another way. Every year, our programs participate in a national census organized by the National Network to End Domestic Violence. In a single day in September, our program served 2,650 domestic violence survivors and answered 676 crisis calls. That averages out to more than 28 crisis calls each hour. Unfortunately, on Census Day, Ohio's programs also turned away 252 victims. That's almost 10% of the requests that were made that day. And that happened because they didn't have enough room or resources to serve the families that needed them. 2 years ago, Ohio budgeted $1 million for our programs and became one of 33 states that provide state support for domestic violence services. We have an awful lot of advocates and program staff on this Zoom call, and every one of them will tell you how much they appreciated that support. This year, our program's VOCA cuts were cut by $7.7 million. And that $1 million in state general fund revenue certainly softened that blow. Because of that line item, this year, our programs received $12,000 grants apiece, and they put that money to good use. They used it for repairs to vehicles and buildings, for furnitures and appliances, for children's items, for improving accommodations for survivors with disabilities, for food, and to support staff pay. Yes, Ohio's domestic violence programs appreciated that $1 million. But it is so important to know that among the 33 states that provide state support for domestic violence services, Ohio's support is the lowest on a per capita basis, only 9 cents a person. Compare that to our surrounding states. Michigan spends $1 per person. West Virginia spends $1.40. It's $1.49 in Pennsylvania and $1.50 in Kentucky. I'll wrap this up. Domestic violence programs are standing strong during the pandemic, providing essential services while meeting social distancing requirements and dealing with staff reductions. Please, ask your legislators to provide a stable funding source for our programs. Adult and child domestic violence victims depend on our emergency shelters and life-saving services when they are in crisis. Ohio's domestic violence programs and your communities need more state support to keep families safe. Thank you. So next up is Dionna Buchanan. Dionna is ODVN's incoming board president. She's also director of Safer Futures in Kent, serving survivors in Portage County. And she's going to tell you a bit about running a busy DV program during a pandemic.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you all for being here today. And I'm one of those programs that Mary actually just finished speaking of. During the pandemic, it has been a challenging time in shelter work, right? And so we're seeing more intense cases. We're seeing our crisis calls are lasting so much longer than they were before because people are in a real crisis. So it's literally like we have a crisis within a crisis. We have the pandemic, and then we have the crisis of DV and the numbers being on the rise. We have served 74 men and women and 69 children. Our crisis calls on our crisis line have increased by 150%. It is unthinkable to think that from in a 2.5 month period of time that the calls could increase like this. Our VOCA grant here at Safer Futures was cut by 32.8%. That's major for us. We have had to let go of our assistant legal advocate, which is affecting our people in the court system, those that we serve that need assistance in court. We've had to cut our support group facilitator, which then in the community, we're having to adjust our support groups that we often offer to the community. And as Mary said, collectively, $7.7 million. Programs have been forced to lay off frontline staff. They've been forced to eliminate life-saving services that we offer. And then we've had to cut programming that's in the community. Here's what I want you to take one moment and consider with me. If you showed up to the emergency room, you expect to see a doctor, right? You're going there because something is wrong and you're in need of a service. If you showed up and they said to you, I'm sorry, there's no doctor here that's available, and your very life depends on you seeing that doctor, and you can't, there's something that you need that you cannot receive. So imagine the programs that could have to close with another cut if we're faced with more cuts. And we have people that are in need of services and they're showing up and there's nobody to provide those services. Or those services have to be modified or adjusted, or they no longer exist. That's major. The people that we serve are coming to us and their very lives are depending on us helping them to start this journey-free life that's violence-free. We need your support. We cannot afford to have more layoffs. We cannot afford to have programs closing, because where do we have people go if that happens? So please support us in this. I am a person that is here in the trenches, on the ground, seeing it on a daily, and we need your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Dionna. Hard to hear that stuff, what's going on in the front lines, but that's the reality of what is going on in Ohio today. I'd like to introduce our first slate of legislators on the program today. Representative Laura Lanise, Senator Nikki Antonio, and Representative Erica Crowley. Thank you. Senator Antonio.
Well, good morning. It is very lovely to see a sea of wonderful faces, all dedicated to the same issue and mission, I will say, for many of us, including myself. And thank you so much for the invitation to join you from the Ohio Domestic Violence Network. As many of you, and certainly Mary has, as she said, and I know many of you are making your calls to legislators, keep it up. Tell your story. One of the things that I want to say that I always talk to advocates, and for those of you who have heard me say this before, I just ask for your indulgence to say it one more time. Each one of you that goes to advocate, that either calls a legislator, gets on a Zoom meeting, talks to their legislative aide, which in many cases is like talking to them. When you tell your own personal story that you are the expert of, whether you're an ally, a survivor, someone who this issue is the most important issue to you, it makes a difference. The personal stories that people tell, they really resonate with legislators. Many of us will repeat them. We will take them with us when we go and talk to fellow legislators, trying to convince them, as in this case, that what's really needed right now is an increase in the budget line item. I'm one of those legislators that worked for years trying to get a dedicated line item on the budget. And we were very successful only because we all worked together. Things like that don't happen in a vacuum, and they never happen because of just one person. It was years of cumulative work that made that happen, it's imperative that there's a line item in the budget, because then it shows that there's a priority for the state of Ohio. And when you start out just with $1 million, it marks it. It's a line in the sand that I absolutely am convinced needs to be crossed and increased. And so I am one of those legislators that's going to be talking to my colleagues about the necessity, absolutely, for increasing that line item. You know, part of the failing of the way we fund right now, the support that we give, is that it's an even distribution across the state that is not evenly divided. That's a problem. Because we know that a county like Franklin or Cuyahoga County is much different than Crawford County or some of the other smaller counties. But yet, because we are probably pragmatic more than anything else, we know that we can work with what we've been given as far as a distribution for the moment, while we work to increase the dollars and increase the support. I think it's important for everyone and every legislator to understand that this has been one of the worst years for domestic violence. We know this. We know the stats are bearing it out. We're hearing the stories from folks. And again, our legislators, don't assume that all the legislators have just read the news headlines and are up to date with all of the information. Assume when you walk into that conversation with them that they're starting at square one. That's the best place to start with anyone. Make no assumptions that they know the issue, unless you've done your homework and know for sure that they have, and then you can work from there. And I guess that's the other thing, is do your homework when you go and talk to a legislator. Know a little bit about who's been with the issue, who's actually been there, and who maybe needs a little bit more information to get there. If there's one assumption you can, I suggest everyone make when you're doing advocacy work, assume that the person in front of you is going to get where you want them to go. Believe that. When you believe that, it carries forward to the person in front of you. I am a very strong believer in the power of the ability to move people when they're compelled, when the person who's on the other side of the conversation believes that there's the possibility that they can move. And so if I can encourage you to do anything, it's obviously first believe in yourself, the ability that you have to be able to tell your story, convey that to the person in front of you, but and then move them, absolutely move them. I am hopeful. So in the Senate, I want to tell you a little bit about, real quick, because that's the other thing Mary asked me to do. So I've been in the House. I was in the House for 8 years, and now I'm on my 3rd year in the Senate of my first term. And so, because it's a 4-year term. So what happens is the House deals with the governor, catches the governor's budget, and they vet it. They may amend it and change it, always do. It never comes quite the same as it came out of the governor's office, and then it comes to us. As we're in the Senate, we're not sitting idly by, though. We're starting to have conversations about the as introduced version that came over from the governor, because so there's a point where there's kind of simultaneous action going on, but the House will make their decisions first on the budget, send it to us, and then we will continue to work, continue to hear from folks, see what it is they've sent to us, and then from there amend, because we always do. And then we'll send it back to the House for concurrence, hope that we concur, but usually it goes to a conference committee where the final details are hashed out, and then we end up with our final budget when it's members of the House, members of the Senate come together in conference committee and ultimately come up with the agreements that we need to have to finally pass the budget. I'm very excited that that Representative Erica Crowley is on this call today, because I'm so excited about her service in general, but I'm very excited that she is this year's ranking member of finance. So she's the ranking member from the Democratic caucus. And for those of you who don't know, she's the very first African-American woman to serve as the ranking member on that finance committee. Finance committee is an incredible responsibility. And the fact that she's here today shows her dedication to this issue, because she's got a lot going on. I'm very proud of her leadership, and it's because of leaders like Erica Crowley in the House that we can do this dance between the House and the Senate. So with that, I want to say thank you so much for inviting me. It is the loveliest thing to be on the first Zoom call of the day with so many beautiful faces. And I appreciate your dedication and your work that you're doing and that you'll continue to do, so we can get more support for ODVN and all of the survivors across the state of Ohio. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you so much for always being in our corner. We very much appreciate that. So Representative Laura Lanise is here. We're going to ask her to please unmute, and she has. And Representative Lanise was very important in passing, for the first time ever, the line item in our state budget just 2 years ago. Thank you, Representative Lanise, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And I am very proud of that moment of being able to get that line item first time ever. It's probably one of the days where I feel most proud to be part of the Ohio legislature. I currently have the ODVN request #1 on my list for this round. I'm hoping that we can get this across the finish line. I've also reached out to all of my female colleagues in the House to share that with them and ask for their support, because I think the more that we have asking for this to be the #1 request or in the top 10 requests, the better chance that we have to get it. And I know this is not just a women's only issue. This is a family issue. This is a society issue. But I think that if we can unite as women legislators, we can have a lot more power in trying to bring this across the finish line. My #2 request is for the OASV request. And I saw that they are on here. And I think that these two issues, especially in the pandemic, are where we need to put a lot of our resources and a lot of our attention. I'm hopeful that we can get this done. I understand that there are a lot of people who have a lot of needs during the pandemic, but this is one of the most critical for our families in Ohio. So thank you very much for having me. Thank you for your assistance in passing House Bill 33. I noticed that one portion of my original House Bill 33 is now, it was separated out of House Bill 33, but it's Representative Abrams is taking it on. Originally, it was me and Representative Crowley. It's the military domestic violence bill, and I'm hoping that we can get that across, as well as there's a bill that I have with Representative Boggs on the marital rape exemption. So these are some of the important bills of legislation that we are working on, trying to create support for these and for the issues generally. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Lanise, and thank you for being one of our champions. Next up is Representative Crowley, who Senator Antonio spoke highly of just a few minutes ago. So we're looking forward to hearing from you, Representative Crowley.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me here today. And thank you, Senator Antonio, for those kind words. I truly, truly appreciate it. And so I just want to say, to her point about my commitment to domestic violence awareness and supporting survivors. I'm supposed to be in finance right now. We have like 21 live in person people coming to testify today, but this was so important that I stepped out to speak with you all today. This isn't an issue that I have spoke about on the floor as being a survivor myself of domestic violence, and will support this in the budget and help move it forward to the Senate. As Senator Antonio said, it is a dance. So even though I am the ranking member on finance, I have to speak with my colleagues across the aisle and try to make sure that it's an important issue and priority for them. So they will make sure that it stays in as we deal with the as introduced version, the sub bill, and then the final version that we end up sending over to the Senate. And then when it goes to the Senate, I will call Senator Antonio and my other colleagues over there and say, you know, I know that this is important for you. Can you talk with your colleagues about keeping it in? And she does that, you know, so it is a dance, it's a partnership. My advocacy doesn't stop just when I send my priorities over to the other side of the aisle. I have to advocate as well. And that's why I would like for us to continue to work hand in hand as we go through the budget process, having you call your legislators, your senators, writing emails to let them know that we need to increase the budget. $1 million is not enough, especially when we look at what has happened. I mean, even before the pandemic, $1 million wasn't enough to really support the work across the state of Ohio. But even with us
this is Dr. Mendes.
through
so the kits, like all the things that need to go into the kit.
You know, when we look at what survivors have gone through and the organizations that have tried to support them, we need to make sure that our priority lines up with that and funding is required. I would say $5 million is not enough either, right? To do this work and to support survivors. But I appreciate that ask. It is ambitious, and I say we can do it. We have the money. It's just a matter of making it a priority. And we say, you know, show me your budget, I'll tell you what your priorities are. And so when we don't fund this work, then it says that it's not a priority to us as a state, and it reflects badly as a legislator. So you have my word that I will continue to support this work. I will advocate for increased funding, working with legislators like Representative Lenise, Senator Antonio. I know my good friend, Representative Janine Boyd is on here, and she's been doing a lot of work with House Bill 3, Aisha's Law, last year. I mean, this is her priority bill, her baby, and we want to make sure we see it through to the finish line. And so with that, I just want to say thank you so much for being here and having me. Thank you for the work that you all do. Thank you for bringing your experiences to the State House. It does make a difference. As Senator Antonio said, like, we need to hear, my colleagues need to hear your life experience, because even though it may not have been their experience, when you share your stories, they have an insight to what really happens, you know, in communities, and how it just breaks down our communities when we don't support one another. So again, thank you for having me. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Representative Crowley, for taking time out of your important work on the Finance Committee, and thank you for spreading the word of what we need here in Ohio. I know you joined in the Finance Committee testimony that was given just last week by our Policy Director, Michaela Deming. I want to thank you for those very important follow-up questions that you asked. It highlights and brings a spotlight to the issue to the Finance Committee. So what you're doing now is so very vital. And if anybody wants to watch that video of the testimony that Michaela gave, it was terrific, and we have it on the ODVN website. Well, now I'd like to introduce Jen Seifert, it was my pleasure to meet her yesterday for the very first time. She's the director of the Survivor Advocacy Outreach Program in Athens. SAOP provides non-residential services to survivors of intimate partner violence in 7 counties in southeastern Ohio. SAOP is also a state-funded rape crisis center. Jen?
Thank you. So like my colleagues, not only have we seen here at SOP a 35% increase in survivors in the past year, but the abuse that our clients are reporting is more severe, and we've also, like others, faced significant funding cuts. And I'm not trying to downplay how dire the situation is, but today I'd like to talk a little bit about hope. If you were to plot the US DV rate since 1990 to today, you would see a fairly significant downward trend, but with a dramatic spike in 2020. And while that might not seem hopeful at first, what this does tell us is that the historical decline isn't happenstance. This is a direct result of increased investment in victim services and prevention efforts that are supported through legislation such as the Violence Against Women Act. And if you look at the CDC Domestic Violence Prevention website, you can see the factors that promote domestic violence, but then also the strategies to decrease domestic violence. And in reviewing those two sources, you can see why the pandemic has caused DV rates to spike, but you also can see how deploying strategies such as economic supports for families and quality shelter and advocacy services has brought historically those rates down. So to all my colleagues, I know that our organizations are in survival mode, and thinking about anything beyond getting through today seems like a luxury. But history not only shows us that what we've been doing since the pandemic, of course, was working. And that means that with the right support, we can do it again. But to our legislators here on our calls, we need your help. But I assure you that increasing our state line item is an investment that will save survivors and our children from enormous suffering, but for some, it will save their lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Our second slate of legislators includes Senator Stephanie Kunzie and Representatives Janine Boyd, who worked to get $5,000 added to the transportation budget for vouchers for survivors, and Representative Cindy Abrams. And first up, Senator Kunzie.
Well, good morning. Thank you for having me. Actually, I'm just really grateful to be here with you today, and I apologize. I was on a press conference involving human trafficking, and I'm also coming from the Ohio Children's Trust Fund board meeting. So I've been in lots of virtual meetings today talking about prevention of human trafficking and expungement and help and hope for victims of trafficking, prevention of child abuse in our state. And now I'm really grateful to be able to participate today at ODVN Spring Advocacy Day. And I miss all of you in person. I look forward to hearing from your presenters and from your advocates on this day every year. And I just wanted to touch briefly on sharing a little bit about what's been going on in the Senate. I apologize if I repeat anything that Senator Antonio might have said earlier while I was away on those other Zoom calls, but I wanted to make sure I highlighted Senate Bill 90, the strangulation bill. I'm hopeful that she mentioned that. That's the bill that will expand the offense of domestic violence, and also to prohibit a person from knowingly impeding the normal breathing or circulation of the blood of a family or household member. It's a reintroduction of Senate Bill 146. Unfortunately, also reintroduction from Senate Bill 207. In the 132nd General Assembly, it did receive a 30 to nothing, I think, vote in the Ohio Senate. So 30 members supported it. So I'm hopeful that in this new General Assembly, we will have an opportunity to vote that out of the Senate and get it over to the House, where it also had a successful vote a few years back. We just need it to pass both chambers in the same General Assembly. You know, this legislation has garnered widespread bipartisan support. And I think it's one of those pieces of legislation that, especially with the numbers and the facts and the figures that we're hearing, I know we just heard some of them just moments ago. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but when we have more than 50%, 58% of programs that are seeing a severity in violence and injuries reported, and including an alarming increase in strangulation, we just know that this legislation is needed. We knew it was needed 6 years ago. It's definitely needed now more than ever. So I am hopeful as we continue to work to strengthen and increase penalties on strangulation. We know it's a predecessor to even more severe, oftentimes deadly instances of domestic violence. I'm hopeful that we can get this across the finish line, especially this year after the pandemic, where we're seeing such an uptick in victimization and in strangulation, and just in increased violences and injuries and severity being reported. So we know if it's a 50% or 58% increase in what's being reported, we know that what's not being reported makes those numbers much higher. And that's a huge concern for myself and for my colleagues. I know Senator Antonio shares that concern. The other thing I wanted to just touch on briefly, that Rep. Crowley was doing a good job. Obviously, the Senate does not have the main operating budget yet, and we just received the transportation budget from the House. As you know, the budgets begin in the House, they come to the Senate, they go back to the House. And so I understand that ODVN is requesting a $5 million annual, $10 million total allocation to the line item for the next biennium. And I just can't echo Rep. Crowley's words enough. We know that that is probably not enough money to really sustain what we've seen even prior to the pandemic, and certainly in light of. And so I will just tell you that, you know, I will take a long, hard look at what we're doing here in the state and how we can achieve that goal of the 5 million for each fiscal year, because I think the numbers, the data speaks for itself. You know, the increase in services and the shelter, survivors seeking shelter, calls to the hotline, other requests in 2020, we're just seeing such a flux in the numbers. And we know that people who have experienced domestic violence are just not going to be able to it's not like they wake up in 2021 and it's okay again after the pandemic. The services that they needed during the pandemic are going to continue. And we know that that is just not going to be something that the current line item is going to be able to cover. I would also like to just talk, I mentioned the Children's Trust Fund Board. You know, that's the part of the entity in our state charged with prevention of child abuse. But we know that 1 in 4 children in Ohio is exposed to domestic violence, you know, which in of itself is obviously an abuse. And so we know that there are a record number of children served in shelter in 2020 as well. So for all of Ohio's families, I am here saying that we in the Senate are committed to whatever we can do to reduce instances of domestic violence, prevent domestic violence, and then really help victims and survivors of domestic violence seek the services and the help that they need to start a new life, to get hope, and really to break away from that pattern and cycle of their abuser so that they can have a successful, happy, and safe life. So I'm looking forward to working with my colleagues, both in the House and in the Senate, as we continue our partnership with all of you, which your voices matter, your stories matter, and they're what really help inspire us to create great legislation that really serves all of Ohio.
Thank you, Senator. You have been one of our champions for many, many years. We've always seen you at the kickoff to Domestic Violence Awareness Month in October. You've championed our bills. You are someone we know we can count on and turn to for help. So thank you for your continued support.
Thank you.
Next up is Representative Janine Boyd, and we are very much looking forward to hearing from you, Representative Boyd.
Good morning. Thank you guys so much for having me back. I still have a little boy and he's in the background with Sesame Street and a train going. So I apologize for background noise, but if I don't have that noise, you'll hear a different noise altogether, a displeased noise. So bear with me. So I certainly very proud to continue this work alongside my colleagues who've already spoken today and who've yet to speak. We have really moved the needle on Aisha's Law, which is again a priority bill. Very grateful for that. It remains House Bill 3, and we almost got it out of the Senate. My joint sponsor and I, Rep. Brothers, we almost got it out of the Senate last General Assembly. As you know, we did get it out of the House unanimously, out of Finance unanimously, with funding for police training on the lethality protocol and the tool. And the pandemic happened, just like it happened to all of us. It just happened, and it really delayed the proceedings in the Senate. I mean, there were so many cancellations of Senate because of, you know, folks being exposed and contracting the virus. So which was the right thing to do, was to cancel those hearings. But that meant that, you know, some really important stuff got delayed. We had 2 really powerful hearings in the Senate, though, and I think we really made an impact there. And I think that we are well on our way, this General Assembly, to passing Aisha's law. And I'm so grateful for the support of all the amazing legislators on this call. Rep. Crowley, Senator Kunzie, I'm so grateful for their support of the bill. And as you might also recall, Aisha's law aims to create a continuum of protections, strengthened protections for survivors who are at greatest risk of losing their lives. So the highest points of lethality, if you will. It does not end domestic violence as much as I wish it could, but it does aim to really address the points of contact that have really failed in Ohio and other parts of the country, honestly, have failed survivors. So to really strengthen those points of contact, from the point of engaging with the law enforcement officer to, you know, ensuring that they have the contact with an ODVN provider, and then that person moving them through the process from, you know, court involvement to treatments, medical attention, etc. So that's the goal. I would like to also add some really, really great news. I was able to, when I first introduced the bill back in 2019, there was language around expanding the kinds of evidence that could be considered in domestic violence cases, especially these lethal cases. And after much debate and reconsideration and research, I removed that language and created a presentation to the Ohio Supreme Court. They have a commission on rules, and the idea of expanding evidence is actually under their purview. So I modeled that presentation and the language after the last expansion in child abuse cases. Senator Kunzie mentioned child abuse in our work on the Ohio Children's Trust Fund Board, which I'm very grateful to serve on with her. And the good news is the Ohio Supreme Court Commission on Rules is considering my presentation, my proposal to expand the kinds of evidence that can be considered in domestic violence cases. They're reviewing that proposal on their cycle, which begins this year in March, I think, or May. It's an M month. And now that I'm a mom, that's all I can give you. I have the mom brain. So that's really exciting that they're considering it, and they've done a lot of research in the past year on the concepts in the presentation that I offered and the proposal that I offered. So we might see even more opportunity to ensure the safety of survivors as they go through the process, which we know, again, has failed them. And then lastly, and thanks, Senator Kunzie, for bringing up the trust fund again. Because the last trust fund meeting we had, this is what we talked about. We talked about domestic violence and just the inextricable linkage between, you know, children who witness violence and DV and the kinds of causes and policy we should be enacting and engaging in. It's the budget. I know you have priorities. I'm so grateful that Aisha's Law, House Bill 3 is one of them. I think I said last time, the more you can engage legislators who may be unfamiliar, you know, with, because as we as legislators have conversations with our colleagues about our bills, we can tell who is exposed to the concept of domestic violence and who isn't. And I have had conversations with current legislators who believed at one point that they didn't have domestic violence issues in their district. They'd not heard of them. And then when I encourage them to speak to their law enforcement, and they do, they find out, oh my gosh, there are these cases. And they had no idea how many of these cases there were. It's true, and I promise you that. I mean, come on, you know, Erica Crowley just said that she's the first Black woman, you know, a ranking member of finance. That blew my mind. Really? Ohio? Come on. Okay, so like there's a lot of people that are really unfamiliar. So the more you can engage legislators, you know, using your law enforcement partners, having them come in to testify or to, you know, meet or write to their legislator about their experience with DV and how needed additional supports are, not only for survivors, but for them to engage and facilitate a safe removal of folks. That's important. The more you bring staff, folks that are on the frontline workers doing this work. And by the way, I was able to keep, it's a small amount, it's $5,000, but it's based on the numbers Mary gave me. I was able to get you some funding for transportation, because I know that's a big issue, right? And so based on the numbers that Mary gave me, I was able to get $5,000 in the budget. We kept it in the house for transportation costs. So you can get gas cards and vouchers, transportation vouchers to your survivors or clients to get to and from, necessary appointments. So work on keeping that in the Senate, because that's all it's for. It's just for transportation. It's small amounts, modest, but it's based on the numbers that you all gave me. So, hopefully we can keep it in the Senate and pass that along. But if the more you can engage your legislators across the state, especially the smaller counties or medium counties where they don't think this is a big deal, they think it's a big city issue, you can engage them with folks who live in their districts who do this work or who are survivors themselves to share their stories and to share their experience. I think that the better educated your legislature will be, and the more opportunity you'll have to pass important policy and fund and get necessary funding. Of course, I'm a supporter of all the things that you have prioritized, and I'm here for you. So thank you guys so much. The baby didn't scream the whole time. I feel so successful in that regard. And thank you so much again.
Thank you, Representative Boyd. We so much appreciate all your efforts that you do and are inspired by your multitasking as well. So Representative Abrams apparently has been called away, but through the power of technology, we received a text from her aide that I would like to share with you now, some of the words that she wanted to share with us today. First off, that she was grateful for being invited, that she had to leave to give sponsor testimony on another bill that she is carrying. As you know, Representative Abrams is sponsoring House Bill 93, which expands the Safe at Home program currently administered by the Secretary of State's office. This will help protect victims of violent crime and domestic violence from their address being found on our public government databases. Representative Abrams was also the domestic violence investigator when she was a Cincinnati police officer, so she's very familiar with women helping women in the Cincinnati area. Representative Abrams truly supports this important issue. She is also on the Finance Committee and a member of the Majority Leadership Team. She will be supportive of your amendment requests. And I do know that our Policy Director, Michaela Deming, and Executive Director, Mario Doherty, recently met with her as well. So thank you, Representative Abrams, for championing our cause as well. Next up is Dionna Clark, who is a survivor, author, and activist in Columbus, and she's been working to improve gun and DV laws for the last 15 years.
Thank you, Mary, ODVN, for all the work that you guys do for survivors like myself and others that are in the trenches of this act of domestic violence. I am a survivor, and I say that with compassion and pride, simply because I have compassion on those that, like myself, are still dealing with domestic violence and those that have been able to overcome it. I say it with pride because I was able to remove myself from the act of domestic violence. However, the experience of domestic violence still lives with me. After experiencing domestic violence, accompanied with being shot twice at point blank range when I decided to leave my ex-boyfriend, it left me with a series of nightmares, heightened anxiety, constant panic attacks, and it threw me into a deep depression. This trauma would be my companion throughout the years. It showed up in my relationships with my family members. I became very clingy to them, very needy, out of the thought of thinking that I was going to die because of the panic attacks. It also showed up in the same capacity when it came to the opposite sex, which also took me into this whole repetitive cycle of being with men that were abusive because I felt the need to need them for protection. It showed up in my work as a social worker. Those cases that I had to deal with that dealt with domestic violence, I tend to shy away from those. And my supervisor did pick up on how my cases differed between those that did not have domestic violence involvement versus those that did. I did not want to deal with those cases at all because of the triggers that it would bring up because of my past experience with domestic violence. But most of all, it showed up in my mind and it showed up in my body. And those that have experienced panic and anxiety attacks know exactly what I'm talking about when I talk about the trauma showing up in my body. I'm a citizen and a part of my community. I'm a part of my city, and I'm a part of this beautiful state of Ohio. And all I want to do is be a productive citizen. But because of my experience with domestic violence and the aftermath of it put limitations on me, on my personal growth. It put limitations on my stability, and it put limitations on my mental health. And it wasn't really until I was able to get help, the real help that I needed from different domestic violence resources, that I was able to play on an even level, grounded field as it pertains to my trauma and be a better version of myself. I do want to give a shout out to Representative Amelia Sykes, who worked on House Bill 1, and I was able to accompany her with that. Working with somebody that's a policymaker and being a survivor of domestic violence, seeing somebody fight that you've experienced literally feels like, and I've said it before, it feels like somebody puts a cape on you and you're able to share your story. You're able to have that strength. You're able to be resilient regardless of the experience that still lives within you. I want to thank you guys for lending your ear for this short period of time on how domestic violence has changed my life. I'm here today because I want you to be sure and understand that everyday families in Ohio are struggling with pain and trauma from violence that's inflicted in their homes. This is why it's so important, and I love ODVN. This is why it's so important, because of people that have experienced my same experience. It's important for ODVN to get the money and financial support that they need. These programs are critically important for families who are trying to recover and rebuild their lives back. And without the support of ODVN, we would just be left in the trenches. We would be just out. Some people don't make it. Some people don't make it. And I was fortunate enough and told by the officer, the detective that did my case, you should have died. But because of, a higher being, I'm still here today to be able to speak for the person that's in fear of her life, speak to the person that was zipped up in the body bag. The money is needed for programs. ODVN really needs the money. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Dionna. You're just a fabulous speaker. This is the second time I've had an opportunity, third time I've had an opportunity to hear you speak, and you just send shivers down my spine each time I hear you. Breaking your silence is vital. Your voice is so important, as well as the voices of everyone who have stepped forward, who have the courage to share their stories. Without your voices, without your stories, we could not make the progress that we have made these past years. Again, thank you so, so very much. So next up on the agenda is Crystal Keller. She's the Executive Director of Crossroads Crisis Center in Lima. That's a 13-bed residential shelter in Allen County. Thank you, Crystal.
Good morning. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Bridget. Yes, I'm the Executive Director of Crossroads Crisis Center in Lima, up in Allen County in Northwest Ohio. Last year, my staff helped 1,107 women, 10 men, and 156 children flee abuse, go to court, find housing, get counseling, apply for public benefits, and take other steps to build their lives. We also had the wonderful opportunity to empower these survivors and provide them with domestic violence education, ongoing safety planning, and support. Nearly half of 45% of our survivors that fled abuse came into our shelter between the hours of 6 p.m. and 8 a.m. and on weekends. That's why enough overnight and weekend staff is critically important. We want to be there for survivors and their children when they need us the most. But cutting the night and weekend staff is how many shelters are responding to funding cuts. We already don't have enough staff. We must have staff during the day when residents need help going to court and appointments and other things. Last year, even though our VOCA cut was nearly $120,000, we managed to continue our 27 coverage at our shelter and 27 coverage at Crossroads or at our crisis hotline. It's critical for someone to be readily available when survivors feel it is the safest for them to reach out for services. But now the Attorney General's office has told us to expect as much as 34% this fall, and I must look at staffing cuts that I have managed to avoid until now. Having no night staff will be detrimental to the survivors we serve and the departments that depend on us. The loss in revenue has already affected our ability to provide transportation. If a survivor needs a bus ticket to flee safety or to go to work, Crossroads cannot help them. We don't have funds to help them get identification documents so they can file for a protection order, register their children in school, or even start a new job, as our agency has done historically. Crossroads Crisis Center received $12,000 in state funding this year. We greatly appreciate that funding, which helped offset our VOCA cuts, but it is just not enough. At Crossroads, we try our best to accommodate as many families as we can, but last year we turned away 64 survivors who needed shelter because we were full and had no funds for hotel stays or alternate solutions. Thank you to the many supporters who took the time to be with us today. Please help Crossroads and Ohio's domestic violence program during this legislative session. Please tell your representatives and senators to increase the DV line item to $5 million so that Ohio can take care of its vulnerable families when they need it the most. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Crystal. I'm going to take over as fellow Allen County buddies up here. I know some folks are leaving us to start your calls at 11 o'clock. I appreciate you tuning in. If you don't have an 11 o'clock call scheduled, I'm hopeful you can stick with us just for a couple more minutes. We've had such an incredible group of women speaking this morning. I'm really honored to be sharing some airtime with all of you. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with a few thoughts and a charge. Funding domestic violence program is a good investment in Ohio's communities. 1 in 3 women is a victim of domestic violence, as you all know, and 1 in 4 children in Ohio is exposed to domestic violence. As measured by one of our programs, Bethany House in Toledo, every dollar spent on services at that domestic violence program saves the community $65.43 in social costs. That's avoided in police enforcement, lost work productivity, the justice system, and mental health services for the adults and children served. Child protective services, law enforcement, prosecutors, and medical and mental health providers all rely on domestic violence programs to support and provide services to families experiencing domestic violence. Where do all of these providers send survivors to get safe and keep their children safe? To our shelters. Without proper funding for domestic violence programs, those same families and service providers lose a necessary partner to keep families safe. As we keep going on today, at least 100 staffers from ODVN and our member programs have meetings with over 50 legislators this afternoon. We have worked hard to hone our messaging and strategy to garner the support that we need in the Ohio legislature to support survivors. We are working hard today and every day to spread the word about why Ohio needs to step up for domestic violence survivors. But we need everyone's help. That means each of you too. Today and in the coming weeks until that budget is signed into law. Today we are asking every single person on this call, every attendee, to do 3 things. The first thing we need you to do is go to our brand new webpage, odvn.org/takeaction, and find your state representative and senator. The second thing we need you to do is to email or call each of them. maybe even do both. If you speak with an aide or get a response, please let us know right away so that we can follow up, answer questions, and direct our efforts as needed. Number 3, please get on Facebook and Twitter. Tag and tell your legislators why they must support domestic violence survivors in the state budget. We even have our own hashtags. Hashtag Fund Safe Families and hashtag Support Ohio DV Shelters. All right, actually, there's a 4th thing I need you to do too. I need you to ask all of your friends and family to do the same 3 things that I'm asking you to do. For the legislators and the legislative staff who have joined us today, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your dedication to these issues, and thank you for your leadership. We are asking you to continue to be a champion for domestic violence survivors by speaking with your colleagues about how critical it is to fund these services in every Ohio community. Hand them our materials. They're available at odvn.org/fundsafefamilies, and encourage them to meet with ODVN and program leaders so that they too can support us. Stay tuned, everyone, over the next couple of months to our Take Action page and to our listserv for action alerts on the state line item and other policy priorities. We will make it as easy as possible as we can for you to help support us with action steps on that page. Thank you, everyone, so much for your support. ODVN cannot make this happen without you and our member programs. Ohio's domestic violence survivors are counting on us to raise awareness and to find the funding to keep our services available to anyone in need when they need those services. Thank you so much.